With us now, Ashley Davis, former White House official for President George W. Bush, and Shaniqua McClendon, Vice President of Political Strategy at Crooked Media. For those of you who do not know, it is Pod Save America, the liberal podcast, must-listen audio across the political spectrum. Oh, video. Okay, there you go. I'm old-fashioned. I'm a podcast guy. All right. Is this, the fact that Trump is not preparing and winging it, is that something that liberals will actually believe Donald Trump on saying?
Yeah. I mean, he gets up on stage at his rallies and is clearly winging it. I mean, he has a teleprompter, but I would hate to be the teleprompter person who's...
Oh, it's the worst job. It's the worst job in politics. And occasionally, as you all know, you'll be at a place and you'll be able to see the teleprompter because they'll put the big screens out there for him, and you can see it scrolling up and down.
Yeah.
When this happens, debate rules, muted microphones, no live audience, no notes, no visiting with campaign staff in breaks, 2 minutes for answers and rebuttals, no asking each other questions. Ashley Davis, I would submit to you, but I'd submit to both of you. Debates really matter now all of a sudden. This is becoming, this is much-watched TV. We look at the rules. Does this favor one or the other?
I think it helps him just be more disciplined, and that's what he needs to do. Obviously, everyone's waiting to see if he's going to have his gaffe, or especially now that it's her and not President Biden, that he doesn't go after her and offend women in general, which is, I would think, the biggest liability. But I actually do believe him that he's going, so I do think it, to answer your question, that it helps him more than it helps her. However, she does have a problem with maybe going on a little bit too long and not making sense for everything for her answer, so it could help her as well.
Off camera.
Is that a very nice way to say that?
I think it will.
Diplomatic, I might say. But look, okay, I'm old enough to remember ahead of the Trump-Biden debate, when Democrats were extraordinarily confident that Donald Trump was going to lose his cool and Joe Biden was going to have command of the issues and everything was going to be a downhill walk for Joe Biden after that, and then this happened. Take a listen.
And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
Shaniqua, is there just a small chance Democrats are underestimating Donald Trump?
I don't think so.
No?
He did not do well in that debate. President Biden did bad. Everyone admitted that. But if he had even done decently, we would have been focused more on how bad Donald Trump did. He lied throughout the debate, and he actually said a bunch of things that didn't make sense either. He just said it coherently with confidence. And so now you'll have the vice president there standing next to him saying things that make sense, that are accurate and honest, and she'll actually be able to rebut a lot of the stuff he's saying, and that is something that President Biden just did not do.
He just needs to be disciplined and talk about the economy, talk about the border. If he does that, which I actually think I know where you're going, I actually think he can be controlled if he tries really hard. But as soon as she says something, which is why they're practicing for 8 hours of zingers.
You know what?
To get under his skin.
I think he could be in some world. I think he actually was pretty disciplined when he was up there with President Biden, but he really cannot control himself around women.
So you think it really comes down to the women issue?
Yes, he cannot help himself. He's going to go after the low-hanging fruit. I mean, he's already talked about her race. He's already called her stupid and all of these other things. If you look back to the National Association for Black Journalists, he's up there with 3 black women journalists, one that he's friendly with from Fox, but you know, Rachel Scott, that he just immediately started attacking.
Well, to be fair in that situation, okay, she started attacking him, okay? I mean, it was in the form of a question, but it was an attack.
Now, even in that situation, wouldn't it have been in his best interest to keep his cool and respond calmly? But he couldn't. And so imagine what he's going to be like on stage with the vice president, who's going to be not nearly as nice as Rachel was. Her whole point of being up there is to make a point and make the difference and distinction between them. And he's going to do what he always does. He won't be able to resist it.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.